Multi-level governance is the topic of today's lecture. Multi-level governance describes the dispersion of authority away from the central state downwards and upwards. And you hear here the two-sidedness of multi-level governance. Downwards is to subnational governance below the central state. Upwards is into the international arena. So we're talking about international institutions there. So what is multi-level governance? What is the logic behind it? And where do we find it?
Well, we're going to begin with the functional logic, the logic of optimality. And here there is a lovely and simple principle. And we describe this as the golden rule of multi-level governance, which is straightforwardly centralize when necessary, decentralize where possible. So this summarizes the trade-off at the heart of optimality, at the heart of multi-level governance, conceived functionally. That is what is best for a society, irrespective of the politics or the community of that society.
So let's unpack this a bit. Centralize where necessary. A larger jurisdiction can have several benefits, and there's two chief dynamics at play there. One is the notion that as you're producing a non-rival public good, one where my consumption of the public good doesn't diminish your consumption of the public good. Generally speaking, the more people contribute to that public good, the cheaper it is to produce it. So imagine the idea of having an insurance against natural disasters. Living in North Carolina, where hurricanes are not unusual in the fall, it's a good thing to know, it's comforting to know that if something really, really bad happens, there is an overarching insurance system, a national insurance system. For small countries, banding together in a larger, coherent international organization can be a means to gain power that they could otherwise not even dream of, right? So economies of scale is one big dynamic. The other one is that if you have a public good or a bad that spills over into another jurisdiction that actually generates damage among another group, it can make sense to create a jurisdiction that encompasses everyone who's affected by some public good or some public bad. Think of pollution, industrial pollution or river pollution. You might just, instead of having just the people who generate the pollution, also the people who are affected by the pollution involved in decision making. Or think of a finite resource like fresh water in a river delta. You know, these are typical situations where scaling up the government, generating a government that encompasses a number of groups or people or states or regions can make sense.
Absolutely. And so those are powerful arguments for scale. But in the absence of those, or where these are very weak, the default option should be to decentralize. Why? Well, in a way, I'm sure you kind of will recognize that the closer a government, for that matter an organization, but a government is to the individuals that it serves, the more information it will have about what those individuals are living through, what they want, and the greater the effect, the ability of each individual to shape the output. So there are under three headings, three basic reasons why decentralization, small is beautiful, in the words of E.F. Schumacher. Smaller governments work better unless there are overriding reasons to centralize, to have scale. And the first is responsiveness. That is to say, it's much easier to respond to a group of, say, 20 or 200 than it is to 200,000 or a million. And that's the argument that a democracy works better in smaller groups. Each individual has more effect on the outcome, the smaller the group to which that individual is a part. So responsiveness is the first kind of principle. The second is diversity, heterogeneity. And that is to say, where individuals are experiencing heterogeneous conditions, diverse conditions, where they have diverse preferences, so it makes sense to have the government at that level. So take, for example, the difference between an urban area and a rural area in terms of the demand, say, for transport. There'll be a lot of differences in policy conditions. Let's say a particular region is suffering some, let's say, disaster. Now, you'd want overarching insurance, as Lisbeth mentioned, but you'd want to tailor the particular response to the particular circumstances, the particular conditions of that region. Or say in one region, there were particular preferences. You don't want a uniform policy. If you can tailor the particular government policies to the preferences of individuals living in a particular region, so much the better. So let's say, for example, in Canberra, they want buildings at a particular height. They have particular preferences over planning regulations. Why should, if it doesn't have externalities, if it doesn't affect the people in, say, Raleigh or Charlotte, why should the decision then be made in Raleigh or in Washington, DC? It's better to decentralize, where you don't have externalities, as Elizabeth was mentioning, that would lead to scale. And the third principle is innovation. That is where you have differentiation of governance, so you have the possibility of trying out different things in different parts of the country. And so, for example, you could check out different healthcare systems in different states. And in one, say in Massachusetts, you would check out universal healthcare. And if it works there, then
you could upgrade.
Then you could upgrade and you could try it out. You could upgrade in other units. So you have greater diversity of experience by virtue of decentralization.
So I think you get the gist of this. Centralize where necessary, decentralize where you can, where desirable. So let's play with this. And here what you have is 5 theoretical levels of governance, and we put numbers there in terms of roughly population numbers that might go from A, which is a local level, to E, which is the planet, the global, the 7 billion plus people here. And on the right, you see a number of policies that might be desirable for public policy, where governments might want to have a policy. Now, take a minute and take a pencil and just make quick, short notes of these policies and put next to it what you think, just applying the criteria that we just set out, what you think is the most optimal scale of government for each of these policies.
So write out the topics that we had, the problems, and what is the scale of government that is most appropriate to each of this, A to E. And we'll give you a few minutes to do that.
All right, here is our solution. I think there's some easy ones. Let's start at the extreme ends. I'm guessing very few would have put nuclear proliferation at the A level.
Well, hi, everyone. Yeah, I guess there was a coronavirus case. I was informed by the student. So we're now online for today, I guess Friday. Well, just through today, I guess we're online. So, of course, I I have lots of thoughts to add to this online YouTube lecture. Like everybody, you know, including me, we're uploading our Zoom recordings and like on YouTube. And so this is a lecture on European Union politics from these two distinguished professors at the University of North Carolina. University of North Carolina, UNC, has a big, well-known European Union study center. So if you do further work on European Union, you are probably going to encounter resources and experts who are somehow affiliated with the University of North Carolina in the United States. And so, but before I go on here and talk about what their presentation has inspired in terms of what I think are really interesting insights regarding why we are studying what we are studying in this entire textbook, which, you know, is detailed and specific, and in some way is, I just get a sense it's groping to try to understand what we are trying to do with this European Union as a Europeanization, European integration process. What does that involve? Are we creating a European community? Is there a European community? How is this process of evolution occurring? Do we see convergence of Italy and France and Germany and Greece and Bulgaria to create something new, bigger, that is more than the sum of its parts? The authors themselves in this textbook, and there are many authors, of course, and the many different chapters, I don't think they really have a conception of that, or they're struggling to try to do a lot in each chapter. I mean, we read one chapter on Greece, one chapter on Poland, one chapter on Germany, then we read chapters on, like this week's chapter on the Europeanization of member state policy overall, summarizing the findings. So they're trying to do a lot in this textbook, which, you know, is complex textbook, but it's supposed to also be an introduction to the field in European Union studies from the perspective, the impact of the European Union on the member states. And so there is some underlying driving questions that are motivating this study, because the people that focus and study on European Union integration, my impression is that they tend to be people that are very enthusiastic about this European Union project. Right? They study the European Union because they want it to work, and they want it to work because they think it's a route to peace for Europe that, you know, is a violent place historically. It is trying to maybe provide answers to problems not just in Europe but around the whole world regarding violent conflict, like we're seeing in Myanmar, or like we're seeing in other places around the world, where you have vicious violent conflict, like in Ethiopia, multi-ethnic conflicts in Ethiopia, or genocidal conflicts, and also to Europe providing leadership in addressing global challenges like climate change, and that threatens, from the point of view of some people, you know, the future of our entire well-being as a human civilization. And also because it might bring a way by which Europe can be again a great actor on the world stage that it had been the dominant actor until the 20th century, and then Europe sort of become a secondary level actor in terms of conflict and competition among different actors around the world, and, for example, moving to Asia and elsewhere in the Middle East. So the kind of people that study the European Union really want this to work, and so they're trying to understand. My sense is, in reading these chapters, they're trying to understand, what does it mean, this Europeanization process? What does it mean? What is European integration's impact in terms of, not just in terms of policies and policies of the member states, of Germany, Italy, France, but also they use this term in the book, as we talked about earlier, this notions of cognition, discourse, and so they're groping for theoretical perspectives to try to understand what is going on here. And I'm kind of surprised how much is lacking in the book regarding a turning to social psychology to try to explain that. They, like, for example, this video I was just showing you, they talk about public goods theory. They talk about externalities. That's all drawn from economics. And that's not uncommon. in political science has been heavily influenced by economic theory. And so this notion of public goods theory, tragedy of the commons, externalities, that was developed as concepts by economists, you know, in the middle of the 20th century. And you know, you notice in the textbook that we're using, they never use the term. I have not encountered the term public goods. I can't recall reading my line by line reading of this book that they ever used that term, externalities, public goods. But you see them using this here at the University of North Carolina. So those people are trying to introduce some kind of theoretical perspective for understanding what this Europeanization process is and what are the incentives for European integration to happening. And then they're really emphasizing the economic interests. And I understand that, we understand that, right? 80% of European integration is economic integration. But I argue that it's a vehicle for something else. Economic integration is a means by which to go towards attitude and value change in Europe, which is a broader and deeper issue than immediate economic incentives of globalization, that we need to accommodate globalization because we can make more money that way. We can make more economic wealth. And that's important, but this has to be guided in a way by which to bring about a stronger sense of European community. So what does that mean, a stronger sense of European community? I think we need social psychology insights to try to explain that. We all know it's important, and the body of social science and other science literature that I know that attempts to understand that notion of identity is social psychology and its application to politics, which is political psychology. And so that's the framework that I keep going back to explain or interpret what, for example, Professor Huge and Professor Marx are talking about here. Right? We have a notion of externalities, bad outcomes that affect our neighbors, and notion of generating public goods like security for all, when we also have as an assumption that we exist all as members of a community. We might all indeed be members of a community, but the question is, how much are we aware of it up here? How much do we feel it here? It's always been a fact that we are all interdependent in our well-being. The question is, in terms of social science, how much are we individually and collectively aware of that ineluctable interdependence? It's always been there forever. Now, we might not be aware of it, and we often are not, and we might even refuse to admit that we're aware of it. We might become intensely nationalistic and say, we're so interdependent, it's making me afraid because globalization means all of these people are moving into Britain or Italy from other countries that are not like me, and they look different, and they act differently, and they're poor, and I become nationalistic, and I refuse to cooperate with European Union immigration policy, or I promote Brexit as the answer. That's a negation of a fact, which you can't negate. You can't negate facts, but you can react to them, and you can react to them by stereotyping and denying the interdependence. But that doesn't mean the interdependence is going away. And that's the point about this COVID-19 pandemic. It makes it extremely difficult, this COVID-19 pandemic, to deny the fact that my well-being depends upon whether or not the Indian government in Delhi, in India, is successful or not in controlling the coronavirus outbreak there. Because if they cannot control it there, there'll be new variants of the coronavirus that will emerge and evolve that will affect me and you thousands of kilometers away. And we more or less understand that. And it's just a more apparent evidence of the fact that we are interdependent in terms of our well-being. And still, people don't like that. Many people don't like that. They react nationalistically, hostilely to that. But that's one of the impacts of this coronavirus pandemic. It's making more and more apparent what is obvious. What's not obvious, what is a fact, that we are interdependent. And that's it's a precursor for these crises that are emerging with global climate change Anthropocene, meaning human-generated global climate change, which the European Union claims to be a global leader, or wants to be a global leader in addressing these challenges. And I already told you, right? Along with China, it's been primarily the European Union that's been exporting vaccines. The US still has not exported any vaccines anywhere. It's been Europe. I think last time I checked a week, it was 200 million vaccines. I mean, not enough, but they're the only ones doing it on a massive scale, besides from the Chinese to some extent, although it's not clear, you know, and the Chinese vaccines don't appear to work very well compared to the European vaccines. So, but this notion I would argue, this notion of public goods, externalities, that only makes sense if we understand that we are a public, we are members of a shared identity community. And I understand and you understand, or at least the public goods argument argues that my well-being depends upon what you do, and what you do and what I do affects your well-being. And so we should cooperate and coordinate and collaborate through the state or through a central authority in order to regulate our behavior for the common good. But that means we have to understand that there is a community to which we all belong that might go beyond my immediate traditional habitual understanding of who I am in terms of who are my communities, my family, my village, my town, my nation, but also my region and my world. And I think we need to go to psychology, political, social psychology for understanding that process. But nobody, I mean, but that's what I've been working on. But before I go on, let me go to the cyber campus, and I have to redo the share here, and go to cyber campus and share and log out. I think I got to log back in and log in here, and go to attendance, and the attendance, we are in week 12, and week 12 add and smart attendance, and the number is 453. 453 is your number, 453, 453. And so let me see if I can go back without closing this thing here. 453, and so let me go here and go 453, and the number is 453, and there you see there's the number. Okay, so I'll just let that run. So having introduced that material, let me make sure that we well, let me look at the lesson plan, because if I forget, if I don't look at the lesson plan, I might miss something. So let me go share screen and lesson plan, and we go here, and there you see. So we go back to class debate on Friday, and if you haven't signed up, I think 4 people have signed up for class debates, right? So let's see if I can do that right now. I mean, why not? Let's see if I can go to the Google Drive and just show you what that looks like, and move something around here, Google Drive, and let me see here. So stop share, and then we go to show screen, and there's Google Drive. You know, sometimes I gotta be careful here because I get spammed with garbage files sometimes. So I don't know what's here. So let's go here and click here, and so you can see. So there we have last week's debate, and Min Jong will be next week, and Suk Ju Yoon will be week 14. So there's 1 or 2 other people that haven't signed up for a debate. So you know, you need to do that. You still can do it, I guess, for Friday if you want to. I mean, if nobody else opposes you, I will be your opponent. So just to remind you to do that. So let me stop that share there and go back to, let me open up my notes for Europeanization member state policy. And let me go screen share. You know what? I'm going to talk about how I try to conceptualize or understand social psychology of identity building, of Europeanization, the social psychology of Europeanization. So let me go back to the lesson. Let me close that. I don't think we need to have this open anymore. We go here, we don't need that there. And so let me go back to the lesson plan, if I can find, okay, there you see the lesson plan. So I'm going to argue, I'm going to use this notion of social identity theory to try to explain what the social psychology of Europeanization involves. And so I want to make sure you can see the Wikipedia entry. And so I'm going to be drawing upon this notion of social identity theory. Okay. And social identity theory, I think we talked about this before. It's been around a long time. I mean, since the 1970s, 1980s, under Henri Tajfel is this, you know, he's still around too. Oh, I didn't know he was Polish. He's one of the giants of social psychology, and John Turner. There's an entry for him. I didn't know there's an entry for him. Oh, he died a while ago. So, and we've covered this earlier, right? This notion that, one, you and I want to have a positive self-image. I want to feel good about myself. When I imagine myself, I want to feel good about who I imagine. And you want to imagine and feel good about yourself in terms of your own self-image. Two, is the second assumption. We tend to also identify ourselves and create ourselves as individuals by relating ourselves to other groups of people, right? So I understand who I am in this world in terms of my identification as a member of a group. And we talked about this in class before, right? I mean, just again, to pick on me, when I ask the question of myself, who am I? I respond, well, I'm Ben D. Dominichez. D. Dominichez is a family group. So I'm a member of this imagined community called D. Dominichez, right? They're my sisters and brother, my mom, my family in Italy as well, my brothers, sisters, and brothers, and so on. My father's sisters and brothers, we're all D. Dominichez. I'm an American, big group, hundreds of millions of people. I'm a man, half of humanity. I'm a Catholic, that's, you know, 1 billion people. I'm Italian American, that, you know, and so I go on and I have all of these ways of identifying who I am that relate to my understanding myself as being a member of an in-group. I'm also from Ohio, the state of Ohio, and so on. I'm from close to Cleveland in Ohio. And third assumption is that my understanding of who I am in terms of a evaluation of my level of dignity and respect and status in this society relates to my understanding of the dignity and respect and status of the in-groups with which I identify. So if I think that my family is viewed badly because we have a bad reputation as a family, I am going to feel badly about myself. So if, let's say, God forbid, my family members are criminals, I might respond to my family being known as criminals around the world, around the society or community in which we live, as my family, by trying to avoid my family, trying to forget of my family, trying to maybe even change my name to avoid my family, and to engage in mobility away from my family to another group that which I self-identify with, to enter that group so that I go from being, let's say, working class person. My family's working class, they're blue collar workers. And I don't want to be a blue collar worker because I have dreams and aspirations of wanting to be an intellectual, a scholar, a professional. So I engage in efforts in social mobility. I try to leave my working class family background and try to enter the class or the group of global scholar intellectuals, professors who work and teach in Bulgaria and in Korea, who write papers and get them published and go to conferences and study and talk about other people, with other people, about bright ideas, about the future of human civilization amidst of the COVID-19 pandemic and Anthropocene global climate change. So I may have engaged in social mobility. I am no longer a working class person. I feel kind of embarrassed about my working class background, but now I have engaged, through social mobility and through the social policies that have been available to me through the social welfare state, including at the state level, at the national level, through my own work and the work of my family and my parents, who have aspirations for their children to feel proud of their children, by their children achieving, by entering into a higher level status class position in society. We all feel better. Social mobility. Another way by which I may respond if I compare myself negatively to others is through social competition, right? Some groups, it's easier to leave than others. It's a little bit easier to leave a class and enter a new class in the United States than it is to, say, leave a racial group or a national group. So let's say we're all belonging to the Japanese Empire. And this shift from ascription to achievement becomes a more and more important aspect of how people in my community understand who should be given status and respect relative in relation to relative to others. And I come to believe that basically everybody who is Korean culture is permanently disadvantaged, systemically discriminated against, oppressed and discriminated against in a racist Japanese empire, then I may engage in social competition with Japanese people. And so I may decide that the only way we can become a fully respected and dignified group is to break away from the Japanese empire and create our own independent country. So to break up the Japanese empire through social competition. Your gain is my loss, my gain is your loss, right? So we compete on international relations for influence as we understand that I am at a structurally disadvantaged perspective in a position in our social relationship. And the only way I can improve my status is by decreasing yours relative to me. And the third social psychology strategy is social creativity. That Germans are hard workers. We Bulgarians, we Greeks, we are not very good workers. But we Italians or we Greeks, we have a beautiful lifestyle in which our lifestyle is one that emphasizes the good things in life, with our beautiful tourism facilities and our laid-back lifestyle. So if I compare myself negatively as an Italian or a Greek to Germans, I might change my evaluation to another set of criterion by which that new set of criterion, I feel good about who I am. Yeah, Germans are harder workers and they make more money, but we Italians or we Greeks, we Southern Europeans have a more desirable lifestyle because we are better at living life more at a higher level of aesthetic achievement. Look at our beautiful museums. Look at our beautiful beaches and tourism facilities. Look at our ancient Renaissance culture. Look at our beautiful churches. So Germans are good at workers and making money. We Italians are good at living life and our higher aesthetic appeal. Or let's take a more concrete level in terms of engaging in social creativity. That Germans are the economic core of the European Union, but we Italians and we Greeks are on the front lines of dealing with the migration crisis into the European Union, because before somebody can get to Germany or Britain, they have to go through Italy or Greece or Spain. So we are all critical in our own role for creating this European higher level identity that social creativity that Germans, of course, make a fundamental contribution to the European integration and Europeanization because they're such a fundamentally important part of the economics of Europeanization, right? But we Italians and we Greeks, we also play our own fundamental differing role that is critical to the creation of European Union and Europeanization and European integration, because we are on the front lines of dealing with the challenge of migration or the challenge of terrorism. I mean, God forbid, I hate using that term, but sometimes social creativity involves negative stereotyping of outside groups, right? That, you know, that we're on the front lines against, you know, terrorists. And so we're protecting Europe from the terrorists because we're on the front lines with the Middle East. We share a border with the Middle East, and so on and so on and so on. So those are the three social mobility strategies. So social identity strategies, sorry. Social mobility, social creativity, and social competition. And so social competition is bad among nations because social competition can spiral upwards into war. Zero-sum competition. So Europeanization can be seen as an effort by which to create greater social opportunity structures for people to engage in individual social mobility, and also for them to engage in collective group social creativity. That we're all, as Bulgarians, Greeks, Italians, Germans, Estonians, contributing to this European identity building process, because we have to protect our national identities. We cannot erase that. The Germans tried to do that under Hitler. It doesn't work. The Japanese try to do it. It just leads to oceans of blood and failure. That's not how you're going to build a European identity, through European conquest, through empire building. It doesn't work. And if we try it again, we'll have World War III, and there'll be no more world. So we respect national identities, and we use national identities as building blocks in association with liberal values to create a European entity on the basis of these national building blocks, to build a European house that is bigger than the sum of its parts. Just like we talked about earlier, you take these European bricks, the Bulgarian brick, the Greek brick, the Italian brick, the German brick, the Estonian brick, the Finland brick, the Swedish brick, and you put them together to create something that is more than just a pile of bricks. You have a European structure, a European house, a common European home. And we all contribute our unique valued contributions to it. We are different but equal in status. Different indeed, because Germans are different from Greeks, but we are equal in status, or we at least believe we are, or we just try to convince ourselves that we are. And so, you know, I just wanted to show you that there is a Wikipedia entry. I just checked this out right before class. I said, is there a social identity theory entry for Wikipedia? I'm sure there sure is, right? So you see this, they're talking about how in the United States, you know, that social justice movements, I argue, I suggest, attempt to create and change the prevailing structures of institutions and attitudes that associate with them within, say, the United States, that, you know, white is great and black people are inferior. People of color are backward and inferior. That's part of structural racism and white supremacy. So social justice movements like the civil rights movement in the United States attempted to change the American state so that we stop, we through contentious politics, through struggle and government policies to block racist segregation and Jim Crow, to create greater social opportunity structures for, first, social creativity, recognizing and acknowledging black contributions to American national identity, so that people can engage in individual mobility from those groups. So like the Black is Beautiful movement, and the Association of African American Embrace of African Hairdos, like afros, right? And so that's an example. And of course, it can produce outcomes like the election of Barack Obama as president of the United States, something which a lot of people did not like. But clearly something has changed in America. Although, you know, like anything else, change can be reversed. So that's so. Let me show you something that I've been working on this is from a paper that'll be coming out on this topic that highlights these notions in terms of social identity theory. This is the social identity definition. This is taken from a figure that I found in this source here, right? That people engage in social categorization. We dividing the social in different categories of people is always self-relevant. We divide the world into, we understand the world around us by, and particularly people around us, by putting them into categories. Koreans versus Americans, administrators versus professors, students versus professors, categories, right? And you always belong to one of the groups or a third, an outsider group. This lays the basis for social identity. Then people engage in social comparison. People are motivated to obtain a positive social identity through positive intergroup comparisons. So I want to compare myself with your group and I want to feel good about me. You know, I'm a professor. And then a positive social identity serves basic needs for certainty, self-esteem, and meaning. We want to have a positive self-image, and that means a positive understanding of our group's in-group status within the social world that we live in. And then, let's say we belong to a hockey team. We know hockey, playing on the ice, that sport with an ice, taken from the same source here. Low group status. Our hockey team keeps losing game after game after game. Oh man, we really suck. Oh God, I'm so embarrassed to like Cleveland hockey team. I'm from Cleveland and our hockey team is so bad. So maybe I can leave and join a new hockey team. Instead, I'm no longer going to be a fan of the Cleveland hockey team. I'm going to be a fan of the Cincinnati hockey team because the Cincinnati hockey team is always winning, right? So we engage in individual mobility. Is it feasible or possible for me to do that? No. Let's say, just move away from sports here. If I can't, I might say, well, yeah, I mean, Cleveland hockey team is not so great, but you know, the Cleveland hockey team is it's a more fun team. The Cleveland hockey team, our team that we belong to, we have a lot more fun on our team than those other teams. The people that belong to those other teams. I mean, we're more close friends. We do more together. Let's say I belong to the team, right? And so if the status is stable, I engage in social creativity. I change the way I evaluate my hockey team by saying, we are the more fun team. But if the status is stable, no. Let's say the status is not stable. Like, I think I can change that, our status. Like, okay, well, what we're going to do is next year, we're going to do better. We're going to recruit new players. And next season, we're going to beat the other team and we're going to be the champion. So that's social competition. That's taken from this source. Now that's hockey teams doing that with nations. You know, how do we do that with nations? And so that's how I'm going to try to approach this meaning of Europeanization. Okay. So I just wanted to show you those nice little diagrams from that paper that I got coming out that I borrowed to talk about this. So let's go look at the notes, and because got to make sure we get to the notes. So European. Okay. Here is something else from the lesson plan, and I have to go back and open it up here. So social creativity involves compensatory reconfiguration of the comparison criteria to reconstitute the individual perceiver's positive self-identity in group evaluation. So in other words, you know, we compare ourselves negatively with other groups. So what I do is I cognitively, psychologically change the comparison to another set of criteria, right? And so that's social creativity. And so I wanted to, let's talk now about the notes here from the reading, because I have to make sure we get to those notes, because, you know, we should talk about the notes directly. So the chapter is chapter 16, the Europeanization of member state policy. And so they're trying to understand what is going on among the member states in this process of integration. And a process of cross-national diffusion has occurred among the member states in the dimension of policy instruments. That is, for example, appraising the strategic environment, plans to reduce administrative burdens, assessing regulatory impact, and evaluation at the legislative and program level. And I would suggest that the reason why this diffusion, this learning among the member states is occurring is because the member state nations, the peoples of the European Union, do not perceive each other as engaged in social competition with each other. There is an environment in place in which they're more open to diffusing the best practices that they individually as nations practice in addressing anything: education policy, social welfare policy, decentralization policy, anything, that they are more willing to learn from each other because they believe, rightly or wrongly, more or less, that they are all contributing to the creation of a common European house, a common European home, and that they all are playing an important role in this process, even as they are different. Greeks and Italians would be the first to tell you that they're different from Germans. But more or less, effectively persuading themselves that they are not subject to inferior status relative to the Germans, and that the Germans somehow are not using their position within the European Union to dominate and suffocate Italian national identity or Greek national identity, or even Polish national identity, which, you know, as I mentioned in a previous class, is pretty impressive when you think about the history of Polish-German relations until 1989, that there is not more Polish resistance to German influence. There's, you know, I haven't investigated it beyond reading the news reports every day. I mean, I suspect, I can't prove this, I haven't proved this, but one of the reasons why the Czechs and the Poles have not joined economic and monetary union to join the Eurozone is, I think it's partly because they are concerned that that's getting a little too close to being under de facto German economic monetary policy influence. Because basically the foundational anchor of the euro is the German economy and the German finances. You can say maybe you can't make that statement so clearly about Poland because it's a big country of almost 40 million people. But why haven't the Czechs joined the Eurozone? Slovakia has. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia have. Why haven't the Germans? Why haven't the Czechs? And I suspect because they're still nervous about becoming too much under the economic influence of Germany, given their history, right? When the Germans actually annexed much of the Czech lands at the beginning of World War II. But anyway, going on here. But we need to know the details. What has been going on in terms of diffusion? I mean, I can talk about social identity theory, mobility, social creativity, social competition, and that's great. And that's important because remember, I think theory is useful for us to understand the significance of all the detail in each of these chapters, which is like overwhelming at some points. So why is it significant? Why is it therefore interesting? And I think theory helps you understand why it's interesting, why it's significant. How can this be happening? So member states of the European Union are adopting each other's practices, learning from each other, and the European Union is structured to encourage that process, to open up what is going on inside of Germany so that Polish people and French people and Italians can look in and see what's going on inside of Germany and say, hi, how can we learn from the German process, German policies, while adapting those practices to the Italian way of doing things? Because there is an Italian way of doing things. There's an Italian set of institutions that are there, and we have to use them, even if we're going to modify them, even as we learn from the Germans. So, and you know, this person Rodelli, I mean, it sounds like he's an Italian writer. So member states' adoption of the same policy instrument shapes domestic public policy subtly. It leads to states to adopt common methods in order to share practice, evaluate programs, and appraise policy. This Europeanization effect operates through socialization of public managers, policy transfer, and EU-level coordination of analytical instruments to appraise policies. Did I mention how this emotional side of this process is important? That we want to feel good about who we are as a country of a small number of people, say a few million people, like the Baltic states, to a big country like Italy of 60 million. Still, we want to feel like we are contributing to the creation of a common European home. And that is important. And there is an element of loyalty here that, sure, we're learning from best practice through the open method of coordination, and we're learning from each other, and we're still being Latvians, Estonians, Lithuanians, as we learn from the Germans and the French and the others about how to do these things. But we all feel loyalty to being in a European journey, that we share a common future as people within this imagined community, because Europe exists only up here, just like Germany and Italy and Korea and America, they only exist up here, that there's a common European journey, that we belong to a common European community, that have a shared common fate, and therefore we also had a shared common history. And so we feel loyalty. And when I use the term loyalty, that generates emotions, because we don't like disloyal people. People who are disloyal, of the worst case, are traitors. Traitors! Traitors are bad. So loyalty is part of this process. If we're going to be willing to share and learn from each other, then we have to believe we belong to a common community, and that we have these things called public goods and public bads and externalities that we have to control because we care about each other, because we have to, because we're all interdependent in our well-being. And we accept that. We know that and accept it, both intellectually and emotionally. And if you're a Brexiter, supporter of the Leave campaign, leave European Union in Britain, you don't want to accept that. You don't have to accept that, at least not so strongly as they still do in France and Germany. Now that might be correct or that might be incorrect, but that's just a fact because of their differing understandings of their history, of their capabilities, of the relative capabilities. Like I said, I mean, the British know that they won both world wars. They haven't lost a war since the American Independence War 250 years ago. And they know this. And they have an Anglo-Saxon world out there that includes the United States as their most successful offspring, to which they have a special relationship, etc., etc., etc. Not to mention the remaining British Empire, South Asia, and also the other immigrant states created by British settlers, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and I already mentioned the United States. So the Europeanization process has deepened beyond the issue of diffusion of policy instrumentation due to the Euro crisis into new areas of policy instrumentation. So yeah, that's a theme that comes up again and again and again. The European Union's of evolution development, including policy diffusion, accelerates greatly in responding to crises. And of course, the most recent crisis is the one going on right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. And they mention how the European Stability Mechanism was created in March of 2012, in the March 2012 Fiscal Pact, which is officially known as the Treaty on Stability, Coordination, Governance, and the Economic and Monetary Union. So this is like a European version of the International Monetary Fund just for Europe, just for European member states, Eurozone member states. So you click on it, and of course, there's a nice little, I think I already showed you this in a previous class. there's a Wikipedia entry for that as well, European Stability Mechanism. And so you see, and that was a response to the Eurozone crisis. So to go on here, and it's when I go back to the notes, it stops the share, so I have to do this. And the European semester, that, I think that's cute. The European semester, like we're supposed to be European, we're students, like you are students. Like we're in the spring 2021 semester. So we're supposed to learn from each other, a European semester. We're supposed to engage in policy diffusion. We're supposed to learn and study each other's experience so that we can learn and study, like good European students, the best practice for achieving and maintaining the requirements for economic and monetary union, which means how do we get to 3%, no more than 3% gross domestic product as a deficit, annual government budget deficit every year, that we shouldn't have a deficit that's more than 3% of our gross domestic product. How do we reduce our total public debt so it's no longer higher than 60% of our gross national product, gross domestic product? We're supposed to engage in the European semester because we're all students studying each other. I mean, I think that pretty much summarizes that effort to try to convince people. Yeah, it says here, the European semester of the European Union was established in 2010 as an annual cycle of economic and fiscal policy coordination. It provides a central framework of processes within the European Union's socioeconomic governance. It's governance, not a government, right? Because it depends upon a willingness to cooperate and coordinate and collaborate. And you'll read more about that in later chapters. I think in chapter 15 or 16, anyway. So, so back to the notes. Let me go back to the notes here. And I got to do that and go back to the notes. So, keep this in mind. Remember, the former Japanese Prime Minister Hatoyama of Japan wants to promote an Asian union. And, you think about when you read this textbook, wow, could Koreans and Japanese and Chinese and the ASEAN countries ever do what the Europeans are doing in terms of being open to each other and learning and engaging in a European semester to monitor and learn I mean, it's a big step, obviously. So we have two contradictory sets of forces, one favoring less Europeanization and another favoring intensification of the Europeanization process. And of course, one favoring less Europeanization, that's nationalism. Both trends are present in European politics and European public policy. Europeanization intensifies due to the requirements that the European Union imposes to adjust domestic policy to templates, policy instruments, and standards which Brussels adopts. Yeah, all right, but of course, enforcing that is a different. I shouldn't even use the term enforcement. It's based upon a willingness to do so. Europeanization intensifies also due to regulatory competition in response to market trends. Labor and capital tend to move to where the regulatory standards are more efficient in an integrated market. And that's going to be a problem, right? Because if the Germans are always more efficient, then integration of European negative integration, just removing the barriers to free trade and movement of goods, services, capital, and labor, negative integration, just removing barriers means this capital, services, and labor is going to go towards Germany because the Germans are most efficient and integrated, and not just Germany, Northern Europe, right? Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, and away from those less efficient and more corrupt Greeks and Bulgarians. So that's a problem. And the answer to that has to be positive integration. You've got to move towards creating a genuine European community in which more resources are transferred through various policies like unemployment pension systems and social, medical, or Eurozone coronavirus aid to transfer wealth from the rich to the poor, like happens in the United States, like happens in Korea, in South Korea. It's called a fiscal transfer union, right? Why doesn't all the money and wealth in the United States go to California and New York? California, you know, Silicon Valley, the most advanced, developed economy in the United States, or Wall Street in New York City. And much of it does. But the central government in the United States taxes New York State and taxes California and transfers hundreds of billions of dollars every year of wealth from California and New York State to the poor parts of the United States, Mississippi, Alabama, West Virginia, Arkansas. So that all of the wealth doesn't continue to flow to California because that's the most efficient, most productive, most high-tech area in the United States. But you don't have that on a European Union level yet. The European Union budget is only about 150 billion euros a year. I think the American government budget is $6 trillion a year. Over $6 trillion, $6,000 billion a year. Transferring wealth from the rich to the poor parts of the United States. So this is an issue, right? In terms of, but it is a powerful incentive that, my God, we Italians, we've got to fix our problems here, or else we're going to lose all of our capacities as companies move out of Italy, where things are more inefficient and more wasteful, to moving everything to Sweden, Finland, Germany, Netherlands, and so on. Yeah, so this movement is significantly possible exactly because of substantial European single market integration and removal of barriers to the economic resource flows. And so this has been a problem with the Eurozone. Economic and monetary union really didn't have everything it needed to work functionally. When the European Union came out of the sovereign debt crisis several years ago, European economies were even more divergent among the national economies. So when you read the next to last chapter on the the effect of Europeanization on the national economies, that's the point that's made by the author in that chapter, that after the European sovereign debt crisis was over, the financial markets were not going to reject and cause default of the Greek government or the Italian government or the Spanish government or the Irish government to their sovereign debt crisis. It turned out that, again, Germany and the Northern European countries were better off and more wealthy than the Southern countries, the Mediterranean countries. And now we went into the pandemic. And now you're starting to see that the European Union is trying, because let's face it, most of the countries that need most of this help for the coronavirus pandemic economic crisis are going to be Italy and Spain. They're going to need more help than Germany. So you have implicit de facto fiscal transfer union happening but it's not through taxation. It's through borrowing on the financial markets. Using, again, hidden, Germany's superior credit rating and the commitment of the European Central Bank to do whatever it takes to keep all of the member states in the Eurozone to stay in the Eurozone, including Greece, and any country that's in, that they are going to use financial markets to basically give more aid and assistance to Italy, Spain, Greece, these countries that are highly dependent upon tourism, more so than Germany is dependent upon tourism. France also. So it's like a new kind of fiscal transfer that's not really, it's not officially a fiscal transfer because you're not taxing the Germans to give that money that you take from the Germans through taxes to Greece. You're instead borrowing and using de facto Germany's superior credit rating that it underpins, as I said, the Eurozone to transfer hundreds, maybe even up to 2,000 billion euros, disproportionately going, some will go to Sweden and the Netherlands, but it's mostly going to go to Greece, Italy, France, the countries that are the southern countries, Spain. And this process was already happening during the Eurozone crisis. So like we said, Greece is a small country, right? Of 10 million people. They got 300 billion euros in loans to bail out Greece in the Greek sovereign debt crisis, to keep Greece from defaulting on its bonds that it owed, it had to pay in return to the investors who bought Greek bonds, and to stop people speculating on Greek bonds, so that that everybody, the financial markets of the world will calm down, and they understood that Germany and the European Central Bank is not going to ever allow a default on Greek government finance bonds that it sold to cover its budget deficits. So the Europeans put up 300 billion euros in loans in 3 tranches and 3 infusions to this little country of 10 million people, and said, Greece, you have to pay this back. You know, this is a loan. Like, how is this country of 10 million people going to pay back 300 billion euros? And this is before the pandemic. But if you look at, for example, the debt, the loans, the loans that the European Union provided, they were saying, Greece, you have to pay these loans back in 75 years. 75 years? You mean at the end of the century? Yeah, you have to pay. It's a loan. It's a loan. So it's not. We're not taxing Germans to give it to you lazy, corrupt Greeks. No. It's a loan. You have to pay it back, but you can pay it back in 75 years. What does that mean? 75 years? I mean, it's basically for eternity. Who knows what the world will look like in 75 years? In 2095. It's a different world in 2095. So it's like, if you have such long repayment terms, it becomes in effect a de facto fiscal transfer. When you tell the Greeks, you have to pay it back in 75 years. Now, I'm not saying it's not insignificant. I mean, it is significant. I remember when I was a student, when I was your age, and the Soviet Union, and the Cold War was ending, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, right, in 1991, 1992, and Russia emerged out of the Soviet Union, and Russia wanted to enter world financial markets, and and act like an industrialized democracy, and and issue have a real currency that was on the currency markets, the ruble, and buy and sell bonds to cover its budget deficit. And the world bankers said, okay, Russia, you can do it, but first, you have to come to an agreement on paying off the debt that the Tsarist government under Imperial Russia had in 1917. And after the communists came to power, the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia in 1917, they repudiated the debt. They said, we're not going to pay back those bonds that Russia was owed to pay back to French investors and other investors, mostly French and English investors, who had bought Russian imperial bonds. The Bolsheviks said, we're not going to pay that back, ever. And then, so in 1991 and 1992, the world bankers said, okay, Russia, we're going to thank you. Communism is over. We're going to welcome you back. So let's begin by figuring out what we're going to do about all these Russian imperial bonds that you defaulted on 80 years ago, 75 years ago. And they came to some kind of arrangement, and I don't know if the Russian government actually had to pay it back. So yeah, I mean, it was still important. Even though these Russian imperial bonds were from the beginning of the 20th century, they still had to be addressed in the 1990s. But, you know, Greece is never going to repudiate its debt. So what does it mean when now, in the coronavirus pandemic, the European Central Bank, under Christine Lagarde, a former French finance minister, has said that they're going to basically buy $1 trillion worth of European bonds to cover that the member states want to sell to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. And then the European Union also agrees that the European Commission also will issue 750 million euro bonds by the Commission to sell to investors around the whole planet. And they're going to transfer those monies that they raised through some of those bonds as loans to Greece and Italy and Spain and France. Is that really a de facto fiscal transfer union? Not officially, because they're loans. They're loans. But do you ever expect that to be paid back? You say, oh yeah, officially, yeah, they're going to pay it back 75 years from now. So it's a new way. I mean, like this European Union thing, it's something new. But again, it's fundamentally anchored in Germany and the efficiency of the German state and the confidence that the world has in the German economic, fiscal, and monetary system being the bedrock of economic and monetary union. So some of the label of these outcomes are as unfair competition. Some label, that's a misprint. Some label these outcomes as unfair competition leading to race to the bottom across Europe as an economic resource flow. Yeah, right. So that's the danger, that basically everybody's trying to lower their taxation rates and reduce their labor protections so we can attract foreign direct investment from corporations that say, oh, labor in Italy is much cheaper now because the Italian government has smashed its trade union laws to make it easier to exploit labor. That's the race to the bottom. And the answer to that has to be positive integration, that there has to be European agreement on common ground rules on what they will not do to compete with each other to attract foreign direct investment. And sometimes, you know, you've got to deal with the demagogues and the rabble rousers, the European versions of Donald Trump that claim, of course, that the European integration is making it easier for people to come from poor countries like Poland and Bulgaria who are trained as plumbers to come to France and work in Paris. And since they're coming from poor countries, they'll work for half the salary that French plumbers will work for, and they'll come into France and they'll take all the jobs from French plumbers. And they would point to this the European Commission as encouraging that process, and this fear of the Polish plumber. It says here, the Polish plumber and the Polish builder are stereotypes of cheap labor coming from Central Eastern Europe to work in Western Europe. They're both a symbol of the fear that cheap East European labor is threatening the jobs of West Europeans and a symbol of foreign labor being a threat. So this was exploited by those people who opposed the draft European Constitution in the referendum in France, and succeeded in persuading French people that this is a danger, this is a threat. And so you always have to be aware of this, that there are always those people around who will exploit those fears and concerns, but including people like, you know, Marine Le Pen, although now Marine Le Pen is saying that she is not going to, certainly not take France out of the Eurozone and so on. But political debates within each member state became very loud as well as quiet. Yeah, so in 2017, Emmanuel Macron emerged as his answer to France's problems. And the French economy does not perform as well as the German economy. So what's the solution to France's issues? Should it become more like Britain in terms of Margaret Thatcher liberalizing and privatizing and breaking the power of French trade unions? Or should France respond to France's weak economic behavior by moving towards becoming more European? And so that was the French answer, that Emmanuel Macron won the election against Marine Le Pen by arguing for more Europeanization. So this Europeanization process has been occurring by trying to come up with positive integration, whereby there are the beginnings of agreements about common European pension policies and so on, but it's relatively quiet. And it's relatively quiet because, this is pension policy, not to mention foreign policy and military policy, and not to mention taxation policy. These are topics which can provoke intense nationalist phobia reaction. And you always have those political demagogues out there who are willing to exploit this, that we're coming up with a common European pension framework. Oh my gosh, that means the generous French pension framework is going to be threatened by the need to come up with a common European pension framework, which means we French, hardworking French workers will have to give up our well-deserved generous pension program to integrate it with Polish and Bulgarian pension programs. And you can say, no, it's more complicated than that, it's more sophisticated than that. But people, particularly nationalists, they are more prone to get excited, and it's the stereotype. Particularly when you always have those people out there willing to get them excited and whip them up because they want political support. So that's why it's been relatively quiet and steady, because of nationalism. Let me look at something here. I want to, I had all these exercises. Yeah, here's an example of what has happened now that France and Germany, now that Britain is outside of the European Union. We have the French and the British now more prone to conflicts, even sending their militaries over fishing disputes, over fishing territory between France and Britain. The English Channel, there's a very small area of sea, the English Channel, separating Britain from France. And so when they were part of the European Union, there was a common European Union fisheries policy by which they regulated and determined who could fish where in the common fishing grounds of the European Union. And now Britain is out of the European Union, and Britain doesn't want to share its rich fishing grounds with French fishermen, even though they have a very narrow sea boundary of about 30 kilometers dividing them. And during the Leave campaign on the Brexit referendum, one of the claims made and disputes aired in Britain during the campaign was that if we leave the European Union, all of that fishing territory, fishing grounds that we are allowing the French to access off the coasts of Britain, off the coast of the United Kingdom, will all belong to us, British fishermen. And I've heard from talking with people in Korea that the life of a fisherman in Korea or the life of a fisherman in Britain is very difficult. They don't make a lot of money. It's difficult to make profit, right? Even despite how important seafood is to British people and to and to Korean people, it's difficult. The life of a fisherman, is not easy. So, and so British fishermen, whether they be Scottish fishermen or Welsh fishermen or English fishermen, you know, their life was not easy, was difficult, even within the European Union. And they were told that if we leave the European Union, your life, English fishermen, your life, Scottish fishermen, your life, Welsh fishermen, will be better. You will, oh yay! And of course, it's not been better, at least not for everybody. It's so far been worse. Oh. Like I told you, nationalists tend to simplify the world in terms of stereotypes compared to non-nationalists. They tend to overestimate their relative power capabilities, that if we break away from the European Union, we have the capabilities to do amazing things. We will become the Singapore on the Thames River. And they tend to stereotype the world in terms of threats and opportunities. So, and that leads to social competition. Nationalists are more prone to engage in social competition and social creativity. So it was another Falklands War, let alone a modern day Battle of Trafalgar. Yet when naval ships from Britain and France converged in the waters off the island of Jersey on Thursday, it was a vivid reminder of those loose ends left by Britain's bitter departure from the European Union. So, you know, I don't have Wikipedia. Let me open up a Wikipedia page. What happens when I type in Jersey? I just to show you, see if there's a map I can find really quickly here. And so I have to stop share and screen share. And here you see Jersey. Hooray, Jersey. Look at it. This is under the sovereign territory of London, this little island called Jersey. You can see it's right next to France. It's a crown territory, which I guess it sounds like they say in that article I'll go back to, it's not part of the United Kingdom. It's a crown territory, which sounds like it's considered to be part of the British Empire. And there's fishing grounds around it where you can fish. And French fishermen were able to fish here, and now they can't fish off this island because this belongs to Britain, or it belongs to London. Let's put it that way. Or to Jersey as part of as a crown territory, a crown dependency. So just to show you how Brexit has made all of this complicated. So go back to the news report here. The maritime standoff came after 60 French fishing boats massed to blockade a port in Jersey in an ugly spat over post-Brexit fishing rights. By day's end, tempers had cooled as both sides pledged to work out differences over new licensing requirements for the French fishermen who ply these coastal waters. The French protesters shot off flares and waved angry banners, then sailed away. The sudden eruption of tensions in the English Channel 5 months after Britain ratified its split with the European Union on the eve of British election drew theatrical displays of muscle flexing in London and Paris. This is on the eve of the elections they just had in Britain, which the Conservative Party of Boris Johnson did very well in, right? Suggesting it was a politically expedient 6-hour clash, even if it augurs months or years of tension ahead. The dramatics began Wednesday evening when Prime Minister Boris Johnson deployed 2 Royal Navy vessels, the HMS Tamar and the HMS Severin. His office called it a precautionary measure, but it amounted to a vigorous show of support for Jersey, a crown dependency of Britain and the largest of the Channel Islands. A day later, France answered with its own deployment of 2 naval patrol ships near the island, which lies just 14 miles off the French coast. French officials said they were sent to protect the safety of human life at sea in the crowded waters off Jersey's capital, Saint-Hilaire. So the capital of Jersey has a French name. British papers published video of a French trawler ramming the stern of a British pleasure craft. No one was hurt. Early in the week, a French government official warned that France could cut off the power supply to Jersey because Jersey gets its electricity from France, most of which is delivered through undersea cables from France. That brought a derisive reaction from London, where officials muttered that even Germany hadn't turned off the lights when it occupied Jersey during World War II. Oh, look at that. References to World War II, Germany, all on the eve of these elections, these local elections that Britain just had, that the Conservative Party did very well in. Nationalism. For Britain, which just played host to foreign ministers from the group of 7 nations and is debuting its post-Brexit role in the world, a clash with France over fish in the English Channel seemed like a relic of a bygone age, but it also laid bare the risks of life outside the European Union. This is the kind of old-fashioned dispute the European Union was created to prevent, said Simon Fraser, the former top civil servant in Britain's Foreign Office. When you leave the European Union, you risk reopening them. So this is going to become more and more typical. It's a long article. I won't go through it all. Relations had already soured on a range of issues as Britain finalized its divorce from the European Union. President Emmanuel Macron of France raised doubts about a coronavirus vaccine developed at the University of Oxford and produced by AstraZeneca, a British-based drug maker, prompting charges of vaccine nationalism. Yeah, it's really strange, right? Even Angela Merkel said, we are not going to use the AstraZeneca vaccine. Even though it's been used by hundreds of millions of, it's been at least 40 million, 50 million people in Britain have gotten the AstraZeneca vaccine. The Germans announced, we're not going to use it. And my sense is, those British, we don't want to work with them. They're not part of the European Union. They're not our brothers and sisters in Europe anymore. They say they're part of Europe. We just can't. We can't be dependent on AstraZeneca vaccine. And they don't say that. They don't come out and say what I just said. But it looks to me that's what's going on here. They're going to use the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. And the Pfizer vaccine was developed by a German company, BioNTech. Like, they're just continually humiliate us. We cannot use the AstraZeneca vaccine. We just can't. Wow. And they're doing okay, I guess. I mean, they're ramping up the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Wow. Under the part of the Brexit agreement governing fish, which went into effect on May 1, following the 4-month grace period, Jersey granted a fishing license to 41 French boats larger than 12 meters or 39 feet. The problem, according to Marc Delahare, director of the Normandy Regional Fisheries Committee, was that the additional requirements were imposed without warning or consultation. The British just imposed them. The European Commission said that the British government had notified it of the changes last week, and that it was in discussion with London. So London just opposed it. Well, they can. They're not part of the European Union. They're sovereign. Wow. As a crown dependency, Jersey is not part of the United Kingdom and has special status that gives it self-governing rights, including its own legislative assembly, as well as fiscal and legal systems. However, Jersey's reliance on French electricity makes it economically vulnerable, Mr. Delahare said, noting that it was in the interest of the British and French governments to calm the situation. And of course, the media, because the media is into making money, and if you want to make money in the mass media, you got to appeal to nationalism. Right? Our new Trafalgar, right, where Napoleon's navy was defeated by Admiral Lord Nelson of the British Navy, said a headline in the online edition of the Daily Mail referring to the 1805 battle in which the Royal Navy vanquished the navies of France and Spain and established Britain's maritime supremacy. One of the French patrol boats, the Athos, was much smaller than the British warships, it noted. On Thursday, Mr. Johnson called the Chief Minister of Jersey, John Lefond, again a French name, to reiterate his unequivocal support for Jersey, according to a readout from Downing Street. Hours later, the government declared the crisis resolved for now and said the 2 warships would return to port. Fishing was one of the thorniest issues when Britain negotiated its new trade agreement with the European Union, which came into force in January. The deal ended decades during which Britain's fishing fleet was under the same system as France, with the catches negotiated regularly among the member countries. Many in Britain's fishing industry supported Brexit because they believed that for decades they had been forced to share too much of the fish caught in Britain's coastal waters with continental crews. But the agreement sealed by Mr. Johnson and negotiators in Brussels just before Christmas was a disappointment to British fishing communities who had been promised a sea of opportunities by Brexit supporters. Remember, they tend to overestimate the relative power capabilities if you're a nationalist. They make themselves believe what they want to believe. They engage in motivated reasoning. Britain, rule Britannia. We can do anything. You know, and I assume your typical British fisherman is not, you know, the most educated person in the world. Instead, the increase in quotas for British fishing crews was initially modest, and because Britain has left Europe's single market for goods, British fish and shellfish require more documentation and checks when sent to markets in continental Europe, making them more difficult and expensive to export. So there's all these stories now about how British shellfish are rotting because they're still, you know, like the British fish for certain kinds of fish that are available in British waters, but British consumers don't like them. Like I think mackerel, like the British, there's lots of mackerel fish available in British waters that British people don't eat, but French and Germans do. So in return for French fishermen being able to fish in British waters for the kind of fish French consumers do like, British fishermen were able to fish for mackerel that British consumers don't eat and send them to France. But now it's not so easy to send them to France because they have all these new documentation and bureaucracy because Britain is not in the European Union. It's not in the single market. So they have now these new documents and procedures and the fish are, it's all disrupted and these fish are rotting. And many of these British fishermen have been screwed. And the British government's response is, well, we're still learning. We're going to figure it out. We'll get it all figured out, and the things will get easier once, you know, the disruption of these new procedures yeah, okay, maybe. Fishing rights have long provoked acute tensions between Britain and its neighbors. From the 1950s and 1970s, Britain was embroiled in confrontation with Iceland that became known as the Cod Wars. At its peak, you know, fishing for cod off the waters of Iceland. At its peak, 37 Royal Navy vessels were mobilized to protect British trawlers in disputed waters. So I remember that as a kid, right? Seeing these reports on the news and on the television news about British and Iceland boats ramming each other on the high seas as they're fighting over the access to the cod. While none of these clashes have mutated into broader military conflict, diplomats said there was always a risk of accidental escalation, right? Somebody gets stupid and fire a gun. This is not going to settle down, said Barry Dias, the chief executive of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organizations. Fish will be a source of toxic relationship for a long time, possibly for decades. So, please respond to the following comments. Since Brexit is just beginning, that is, United Kingdom domestic and foreign policy will likely become increasingly nationalistic. So in other words, United Kingdom domestic and foreign policy will become increasingly nationalistic, both in saliency, frequency, and intensity into the future. Because of Brexit, is United Kingdom domestic and foreign policy going to become increasingly nationalistic, social competitive, right? Stereotype oriented, both in frequency and frequency and intensity in the future. You even saw, right? Boris Johnson exploited this British pride in the eve of the elections, in the local elections that happened, and the Conservative Party did very, very well. Again, the Labour Party was hit. So do you think Brexit is going to create more and more incentives for British elected politicians to become more and more nationalistic, to win elections in Britain where the modal British citizen is is a nationalist, typically an English nationalist, not a Scottish nationalist, but an English nationalist. Remember, there's only 5 million people living in Scotland, and not all of them are Scots. Britain is 90% English. So you think that London domestic and foreign policy is likely to become more and more like this, like we're seeing here in the case of the Jersey dispute? And so let's go back to Zoom and poll, and let's see if I can find the. Do you think that Britain is going to become more and more nationalistic in its behavior because of Brexit into the future, more frequently and more intensely? So please vote. I mean, if you're an elected politician, you push on and say, hey man, I won again. This is working. This is working. One more person. Well, let's just, share results. So you can see that 2 of you agree and 3 of you are neutral. I think I closed that off a little bit too quickly there. 2 of you agree and 3 are neutral. I thought it would delay for 6 minutes. So then my question to you is, why do you think that? And so let's go to the breakout rooms and break you up into 2 groups, create and open all rooms, and let's make the second person the chair of the group. So Chung Min-ju and Song Hyun are the chairs of your 2 groups. How did you decide where you are in terms of that scale? Can your group decide where you are here? If you think London is going to act more and more like this because of Brexit. And you know, it's really interesting because if it's true, you can say it's going to make Scotland more and more nationalistic. But maybe not. I mean, like I said, it's only 5 million people. They need access to the England market. I mean, you can say, well, they have access to all of the European Union, but you still got to get in a boat and ship it to the European Union. You want to use the tunnel, the Channel Tunnel, you got to go through London to get on the tunnel to get to France and Paris. So yeah, where are you in terms of this? In terms of so have you joined the groups? So Chung Min-ju and Song Hyun, you should join the groups and come up with a decision if you think this is going to be more and more common, frequent, and not only frequent, but intense. Intense. And that means more spiral conflicts based upon social competition. See, I mean, I like doing these exercises because I learn from them. I have to think through what's been percolating in my head because I'm not clear about what until I have to talk to somebody. And I'm talking to you, the students. Wow. Yeah, I get great ideas here, you know, that I can talk about at conferences. Do you think there's going to be, or are there going to be kind of mitigating circumstances that's going to stop this from happening? Like the Americans are going to come in and stop Britain, stop London. Americans are going to come in, the benign hegemon, and say, okay, you British and you Europeans, you are going to cooperate because we got a big problem, China. So you guys be nice with each other or else the benign hegemon is going to get unhappy. And that's going that's going to reintegrate? Is there going to be like the Transatlantic Investment and Trade Partnership Program was talked about a lot, that the Americans are going to make a free trade agreement with Europe, including Britain, and motivated against China, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if we Europeans now have a new enemy in the form of Beijing, we all love each other. London, Berlin, Paris, Rome, Washington, Tokyo, New Delhi, Australia, against big bad communist China. Is that going to mitigate this kind of thing? Okay, so let me close all the rooms. You have 1 minute. But you know, it just illustrates this. I mean, how, you know, I mean, it's just Boris Johnson doesn't breathe while thinking about public opinion. So he sends these two HMS, these two ships, His Majesty's ship, HMS, right, to Jersey, and it worked. The Conservative Party overwhelmed the Labour Party in the local and regional elections in England. A week ago. So, all right, so who's going to go first? And so heads is room 1, and it is tails, so room 2. So Song Hun what did your group decide?
So we were saying that we kind of agreed, but we were on more side of the agree, but we were also in the neutral side because we thought, like, if the United Kingdom's government didn't act, if United Kingdom doesn't act nationalistically, then it kind of like they are showing that the choice they made, the Brexit, is wrong. So
Yeah.
in that sense, United Kingdom will act nationalistically, and have like more nationalistical domestic policies. But in foreign policies, like, thing is that now the world is so globalized that a country can't act on its own and do whatever it wants to do. So the foreign policy might not change too much, but in domestically, I think it will become more nationalistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, because I was thinking as you were talking, when you think about, for example, how, you know, you used to make a distinction when I was your age, there was high foreign policy and low foreign policy. And high foreign policy was security and the Cold War and military policy and so on. And low foreign policy was the international negotiations regarding trade agreements. And that's BS. And it's now even clearer that they're so closely related in this globally interdependent world in which, you know, if you are, I mean, why did the pandemic begin in Italy? Began in Italy, in Europe, because the Italians are so desperate to get foreign direct investment from China, because they've had these ongoing economic problems, that they are so desperate to get foreign direct investment and economic connections and networks with China to overcome the inherent Italian inefficiencies and weaknesses in the global economy. So they had lots of Chinese people, legally and illegally, formally and informally, working and living in Italy and engaging in trade. I mean, I remember following that for the last 10 years. There was an article in the New York Times about how the Italian textile trade in northern Italy was based upon, basically heavily reliant upon legal and illegal Chinese migration and Chinese importation to maintain Italians' fashion textile competitiveness with the rest of the world. I can find the article. I was from it 10 years ago. And then where did the pandemic begin? In Europe, it began in Italy because there's so many Chinese living and working in there. So you can't even make this distinction between low and high politics anymore. And so I'm not so certain that you can separate foreign policy from foreign economic policy, because we're so economic, and the Chinese know this, right? I mean, they're putting trade embargo basically on Australia, on Australian wines, because the Australians have been complaining they want an investigation where this coronavirus came from in China, because it screwed up Australia and everybody else so much. And the Chinese said, oh yeah, we're not going to buy your wines anymore. And so they blockaded Australian wines. You know, that wines you can find in 7-Eleven and at Takeout Express with the kangaroo. They dropped their prices big time because they can't sell this wine in China, so they got to unload it and unload it for us. And that hurts. I mean, Australia's economy is booming, has been booming for the last 25, 30 years until the pandemic because of exports to China. It's been this economic nirvana. It has for the last decades because it's supplied China with iron ore and commodities and coal. And the Chinese are reminding them. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, how much, we'll have a test here. I mean, the Americans are pressuring the Europeans not to get in too much economic connection with China, not to open up the economy too much to China, to not open up their economies to 5G Huawei products from China. And, you know, I don't know, you know, if you're Italian, I mean, China's investing all over. I mean, China controls the port of Thessalonica in Greece. The second biggest city in Greece is Thessalonica. It was populated by Greeks who were expelled from Turkey at the end of World War I. And it's the second biggest city in Greece, and it's a deep water port, and China runs it. And I think they got another port in Greece, Piraeus. And they're investing in Serbia, they're investing in Hungary. I mean, and Greece has been so economically desperate for the last, 15 years now, 16 years. That they're going to say, no, Huawei, you can't invest in 5G in Greece. Oh yeah? Wow, we have a test here. Because, you know, the Chinese are the first ones to tell you, we dealt with the pandemic. We got it under control. And India is becoming a hell with your democracy. Okay, group 2. What did you come up with? Song Hyun Song Hyun where are you?
Yeah.
What did your group come up with? Where are you on the scale here?
I told you.
I did the wrong one. Okay. Chung Min-ju, sorry. Chung Min-ju, what did your group come up with?
So our group came to agree that we are neutral on this question. Because originally I was a person who was on the scale of 2, agree, because I believe that the reason why Britain went out of European Union is because they wanted to be more nationalistic and more, I guess,
yeah,
I guess more prioritize their national interest. But within our groups, there was an opinion that despite the fact that they left EU, the process and overall the results of Brexit is not really what we see as nationalistic. So, and the process was really ambiguous on their position, regarding their position. So we decided that we are neutral on this question.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, for example, they mentioned the Cod Wars, right? So did that escalate between Britain and Iceland? I mean, Iceland's a small country, about 300,000 people. And they, you know, Britain still invested heavily in Iceland. Iceland financial system was intensely impacted by Britain's economic financial problems during the sovereign debt, when the global financial crisis happened. You know, and so they maintained decent relations. Yeah, but that's Iceland. there was some talk about Iceland going to join the European Union until the sovereign debt crisis happened, and then that stopped, and it hasn't restarted. Because Iceland is still economically more, I don't know if I could say it's more dependent upon Britain than it is on it might be because it's the financial system I mean, but again, it's just a small place. But you can say, well, this is just this kind of theater kind of issues are going to continue, theater issues. But you see it, I mean, this weird announcement from Angela Merkel, Miss Europe, the leader of European integration, announced, we're not going to use that AstraZeneca vaccine, period. Like, oh, wow, man. The emotions are at work here. You mother. Ah, man, So, yeah, okay. We're not going to touch AstraZeneca. We don't want anything to do with AstraZeneca vaccine. And so stay tuned, as we used to say in American television in the 1960s and 70s. So back to the notes here, and let's see, make sure I'm sharing the screen share, and I think it's, okay, there it is. So Europeanization may assume discursive forms. That's the point made at the beginning of the semester, right? That one, I don't know if we can fully agree with this, but like at the beginning of the semester, I think in chapter 1, they made a point how European states have changed so that legitimation of public policy not only depends upon approval and support by the publics of Germany and Italy and France for public policies of those countries, that those authorities in France, Germany, Italy, and Greece also have to, or are institutionalized to require that they get support, approval, or at least acceptance or acquiescence by the other member states, the authorities of the other member states, that's part of legitimation. And that might be true, and it still, and does seem to be true with regard to the coronavirus vaccine nationalism, because Germany is able to do that, and with the French accepting that, the Italians accepting that, or at least not protesting Angela, saying, Angela, you can't say that. We want the AstraZeneca vaccine. They didn't say that. They just announced European Union's not going for the AstraZeneca vaccine. And you didn't hear Rome say, hey, I didn't agree to that. They didn't do that. So it still might be the case that, yeah, among the authorities of the European Union member states, they still rely upon not only their own national public's acceptance of their policies and authority, but each other. Because this, you can say, I mean, is this German nationalism? It looks like it's European Union nationalism, at least among the authorities. Maybe not amongst the typical French person or Greek or Bulgarian, who's not like us and not like Angela Merkel, living and breathing European Union, European integration, vaccine nationalism, COVID-19, that's us. We're a tiny percentage of the population. But among the authorities, you get this sense of European identity, European sense of shared European community of fate. We're all tied together. What did Benjamin Franklin say when they were signing the Declaration of Independence for the United States? We all have to hang together. That means we all have to work together, or we're all going to hang separately by the British. So legitimacy is an essential factor. Legitimacy also comes partly through policies and decisions. We'll see what Marine Le Pen, if she becomes president of France next year, I will see if this still holds. Still, meanings and discourses filter these. I mean, that's got to be motivating these people to move. We got to do something here to make sure that the French people don't elect her. So Christine Lagarde, the former French foreign minister, is saying, we're going to pump out $1 trillion euro euros for euro bonds. And so, you French people love Europe. Don't vote for Marine. We'll see if it works. But how many French people know about euro bonds and Christine Lagarde and we know about it. Researchers have identified different types of discourses: coordinated discourse, it focuses on how the European policymakers construct shared meanings. Like, what the frick does that mean? Construct shared meanings while articulating a discourse that permits. Use social psychology. Use social identity theory. It's there, man. You can do it. I keep screaming at these people when I read these kind of descriptions. Communicative discourse is the public explanation of the reason behind public choices. I mean, I got to tell you, when I was in Bulgaria, I mean, I take a taxi everywhere, because it's so cheap. And, typical Bulgarian taxi drivers, how much they know about the European Union, it's like, and I could speak Bulgarian, and, oh, man, there's just so much unlike my students at the American University of Bulgaria. Oh. The crisis of the European integration project, which dominates political and economic debate, raises broader questions regarding the discourse or grand narrative, which is to be utilized to support integration, along with the contestation of the paradigms which have formed the economic policy of the European. Oh, and I rephrase this in my own words, right? So it still sounds so grand. I mean, like, ooh, but again, we have these nasty things called elections, and no more referendums, because even the French. I mean, you got to ask them. They reject the draft European Union Constitution, despite how wonderful the European Union is as a peace strategy for Europe. The Polish plumbers. Ah! The predominant theme in the discourse surrounding European economic integration has been austerity, which of course has been contested. Yes, indeed. No consensus exists on an alternative paradigm. Oh, God. Oh. I mean, Law and Justice Party in Poland is one thing. Poland is a poor country. And Viktor Orban in Hungary is another case, and they do unpleasant things. But France is something else. And if notions of crisis, economic stability, and austerity are discursively constructed, I mean, I come from this working class background. I mean, my siblings voted for Trump. Understand this stuff. I've got working class family in Rome. I know these people. Crisis is a notion that is constructed according to the conditions of specific settings. To understand how crisis, reform, and austerity really affect people, policy people, we should focus on the lived experiences of these people, which is not necessarily at the level of the EU or the lived experience of the people. No, no kidding. Oh, I don't know. Europeanization is challenging to study because both the EU and the member states are dynamic and they're interdependent. That's true. I mean, even if my cousins and nephews in Rome don't understand it, it's a fact. But they'll vote for Matteo Salvini. They were posting things on Facebook. All of these immigrants coming to Italy. Matteo Salvini's right. Of the League Party, the populist Eurosceptic Party, who they put in a box a year ago. Draghi and the others. For now. Europeanization consists of processes of construction, diffusion, and institutionalization of formal and informal rules, procedures, paradigms, styles, ways of doing things, and shared beliefs, norms. Indeedly doodly. Yeah. They are first defined and consolidated in the EU policy process and then incorporated in the logic of domestic and national subnational discourse, political structures, and public policies. Discourse. Oh my God, this is so elite focused. It is just so elite focused. Okay, so this definition highlights three particular features of Europeanization. It originates in different stages and forms of the policy process: policy formulation, construction, embedding policy in practice, institutionalization, and in a much less structured manner, diffusion. It's not simply about formal policy rules, but also about less tangible aspects, such as beliefs, values, norms. So are they going to define what these are? I think they often they don't. I think I know what they are, but you ask somebody, okay, what do you mean by value? What is it? How does a belief differ from a value versus a norm? And they'll go, typically. Okay, we have to stop there. Anybody have any questions? If no, I'll post the recording on the website. So it's been fun. So once again, as used to say on American television, 1960s and 70s, in the European Union, stay tuned.